Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. Two men in the desert. One kneels, the other stands. The kneeling man wears orange. The standing man wears black. One face shows both fear and courage. The other does not show his face at all. He wears a mask. The kneeling man is James Foley, an American photojournalist. On November 22, 2012, members of ISIS, now calling itself the Islamic State, abducted him in northwestern Syria. They demanded a ransom of $123 million, or 100 million euros, an amount they knew his family could not raise, but that the U.S. government could. He remained a captive for 635 days until his grisly murder at their hands. His tormentors made him rehearse his execution many times. They told him that if he said his lines correctly, they would perhaps spare his life that day. But he must have known that you don't rehearse for nothing, that eventually the knife of his executioner would be used to remove his head. On August 19th, that's what happened. The other man in the video, his executioner, was hiding. Even as he stood before the camera, he hid. He covered his body in a black shroud and hid his face behind a mask. A couple of weeks ago, I referred to the words of Jesus when he said, "Men loved the darkness rather than light, for their deeds were evil." A mask is its own kind of darkness. In a righteous cause, faces are shown and names revealed. Martin Luther King did not wear a mask, and John Hancock did not disguise his name. In fact, he wrote it large so the British king would not mistake it. In 2002, Islamic terrorists beheaded another American journalist, Daniel Pearl. The faces of his killers were hidden in the video of his death that they released. In 2004, al-Qaeda operatives decapitated Nick Berg, an American businessman in Baghdad. Again, the killers wore masks, even though everyone knew who wielded the knife. They posted the video under the title, "Abu Musa al-Zarqawi slaughters an American." If not for secrecy, why did al-Zarqawi wear a mask? Because his action was a shameful affront to the true God and the inner law written in every person. Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15 says, "For when Gentiles who do not have the law do instinctively the things of the law, these not having a law are a law to themselves, in that they show the works of the law written in their hearts, their conscience bearing witness, and their thoughts alternately accusing or else defending them." Mexican drug cartels use a beheading as a means of intimidation, and they too wear masks. When terrorists release videos of themselves, most are wearing masks. If they aren't, the video blurs their faces. The man in the death mask who murdered James Foley shrouded himself in darkness because his deed was evil. And what makes it all the more horrible is this: he knew it and he knows it still. Deep inside, the terrorists know they're acting in ways that God detests. Proverbs 6 lists the 7 sins that are an abomination to God. One of them is hands that shed innocent blood. In the end, the executioner of Jim Foley and his accomplices will not answer to a group of virgins waiting for them in paradise, but to the God whose anger is not something you ever want to experience. In a preview of coming atrocities, the murder of James Foley was carried out by a British national. The killer, known to his fellow terrorists as Jihadi John, is said to lead an ISIS cell known as the Beatles because all of them are from England. British intelligence services have tentatively identified him as a former rapper named Abdelmajid Abdel-Bari. His father, Adel Abdel-Bari, is awaiting trial in the United States. He is accused of being the mastermind behind the al-Qaeda bombings of 2 American embassies in 1998. He planned and executed these things while living in England. That news was enough to cause Prime Minister David Cameron to end his vacation and head back to number 10 Downing Street for cabinet meetings on how to handle the crisis. I've discussed before the danger of appeasing terrorists. James Foley said exactly what his captors wanted him to say. He rehearsed it, and so did Daniel Pearl just before he was beheaded. No one blames them, but it drives home the point. Appeasement does not work. Europe has been paying ransom to these terror groups for 20 years, and James Foley is the most recent victim of that policy. Last week, President Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, was asked why the U.S. never gives in to ransom demands. Apparently, forgetting the ransom paid for Bo Bergdahl, he said, "It only creates perverse incentives for those terrorist organizations going forward and a source of funding." By perverse incentives, he means that every time Europe pays off terrorists, it's not only funding their terrorism operations, but gives them an incentive to go out and kidnap someone else. The very success of ISIS also creates a perverse incentive, motivation to be ever more bloodthirsty and violent. If someone comes along with a new style of movie or music and they have great success, suddenly there will be dozens of copycats trying to cash in on their success. Among terror organizations, it works the same way. Others either join the successful group or copy it. ISIS victories portend something awful in the world of radical Islamic terrorism. At first, even al-Qaeda thought ISIS was too extreme. But now, they're adjusting their thinking downward to them. Al-Qaeda and others have begun mimicking ISIS attitudes and techniques. One reason is that they're losing members to ISIS. People bent toward becoming terrorists tend to join the fiercest, the most murderous outfits they can find. Once that was al-Qaeda. Now it's ISIS. The world's most active al-Qaeda franchise operates in Yemen. They call themselves al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They were responsible for the USS Cole attack and the decapitation murder of Paul Johnson, an American helicopter engineer in Saudi Arabia. In a drive-by shooting, one of their operatives, a Muslim convert, fired into a group of soldiers in Little Rock, Arkansas. He killed one and wounded another. The underwear bomber was one of theirs. Their activities are too numerous to catalog, but suffice it to say that they specialize in hitting Americans. They wrote on their website, "We will continue to strike blows against American interests and interest of America's allies." Last week, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula released a statement in support of ISIS. They said, "We announce solidarity with our Muslim brothers in Iraq against the Crusades." Among radical Islamists, crusade means Christianity. Their blood and injuries are ours, and we will surely support them. We stand by the side of our Muslim brothers in Iraq against the American and Iranian conspiracy. A Salafist group in Jordan known as Sons of the Call for Tawhid and Jihad recently proclaimed its loyalty to ISIS. Earlier, I warned of a fifth column in Jordan ready to be triggered. Jordan Salafists in Zarqa province proclaimed their loyalty to ISIS back in July. Also, the maniacal head of Boko Haram in Nigeria has given his support to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi as caliph. In all of this, we see a sobering phenomenon. Every day, Islam becomes a truer image of itself. I'll be back in just a moment. The president and his subordinates are walking a fine line. They're trying to acknowledge that ISIS is dangerous enough to oppose, but not so dangerous that Americans should fight with real urgency. Retired Colonel Peter Mansour served as executive officer to General David Petraeus during the highly successful Iraqi troop surge of 2007. He said, ISIS has proven themselves too strong, too virulent, and too violent to enable local inhabitants to rise up and cast it off without significant help from the outside. European nations are asking the United States for leadership in developing a plan for defeating ISIS, and this administration is failing in its duties to protect the American people if it doesn't create an alliance that can not just contain ISIS, but destroy it. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel said,
ISIL is as sophisticated and well-funded as any group that we have seen. They're beyond just a terrorist group. They marry ideology, a sophistication of strategic and tactical military prowess. They are tremendously well-funded. Oh, this is beyond anything that we've seen. So we must prepare for everything. And the only way you do that is you take a cold, steely, hard look at it and get ready.
So far, our steely-eyed response has been a series of narrowly focused pinprick airstrikes. Secretary of State John Kerry tweeted that ISIS will be crushed. President Obama called it a cancer. General Martin Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, emphasized that ISIS must be defeated. He said, this is an organization that has an apocalyptic end-of-days strategic vision and which will eventually have to be defeated. From this, you might think they all agree. I don't think so. General Dempsey went on to say,
longer term, it's about ISIL's vision, which includes Lebanon, the current state of Israel, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Kuwait. If they were to achieve that vision, it would fundamentally alter the face of the Middle East and create a security environment that would certainly threaten us in many ways.
The president may view ISIS as a cancer, but his aim seems to be to live with that cancer as opposed to destroying it. The president said, we've got a national security interest in making sure that a group like that is contained, because ultimately they can pose a threat to us. Contain them because they ultimately pose a threat? They pose a clear and present danger right now